So, Paul, thinking about this book you've got coming in the new year, what has Christianity ever done for Scotland? Just first of all, how did you first get interested in Scottish church history and heritage without sounding racist, because you're not a Scotsman?
No, no,
But
no. I'm
how did you get
Anglo-Welsh.
into this subject?
Yeah, well, what happened was that God clearly sent us as a family to Scotland. It was a clear call to Edinburgh. So, but in the process of confirming the call, because when you uproot with three teenagers, they can be. My daughter, oldest daughter, said, "There's no way I'm moving to Scotland. All my friends are in London." So it was a big change, and so we really prayed confirmation that God would reveal that to them, which He did, and also to us.
Mhm.
So one of the things, we went to a prayer retreat, and there was somebody, uh, in fact, a series of people who didn't communicate with each other, but they all had like a vision or something that God put on their heart to give to me. And one of them described the old town of Edinburgh, and another one described a vision she'd seen about me working with students. Now, the student bits clearly come. I do a thing called Street Cafe, reaching people with the message of Christ, and but the other bit in the old town. So I sought the Lord. What do I do? And I walked around the Royal Mile, and I knew that there was some Christian history, significant Christian history from Edinburgh, but I didn't know that much.
Mhm.
And all what I did see was ghost tours, witchcraft tours, whiskey tours, and anybody who did a general tour tends to be really derogatory of John Knox and the Covenanters and other Christians. They really put them down.
Yes.
And I thought nobody is doing a Christian heritage tour type of thing in the Royal Mile, and it's crying out for it. So
Mhm.
I got together with a friend called Phil, and we were prayer partners for 7 years. And every Thursday, we'd have a curry or chili or something, and then we would go and prayer walk from the top of the castle right down to the bottom of the palace. And we prayed over everything systematically. And I had a notebook and I jotted down details, what happened here, what happened there. And so what came out of it was the Celtic Tour,
Mhm.
uh, which was a free tour, the first free tour actually on the Royal Mile. And then it morphed into the Christian Heritage Tour, and then the Christian Heritage Centre, which we run in St. Columbus Free Church in the
Mhm.
summer months, and we have tens of thousands of people coming in. So out of that, that was the whole backdrop to what happened. So that was really where my fascination went. The more I dug, the more I found extraordinary things.
Mhm.
And I had this scripture from Genesis where Abraham had dug the wells so the
Mhm.
water could flow, and then what happened was the Philistines blocked up those wells, and then Isaac came and went over his father's ground and unblocked the wells so the water could flow again. And it was like God was saying to me, look, your task is to unblock this information about Christian history in this
Mhm.
old town that not just transformed Scotland, but the world. And I'm still discovering things ever since. It's been a fascinating journey.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah. I mean, probably most Christians or many Christians, think the whole subject of church history or history itself is a bit boring, and
Mhm.
for the nerds, for those who've got a bent in that direction. Why do you think it's so important? Obviously, not just in Scotland, but broader, but the context here in Scotland. Why do you think it's so important that Christians are aware of and familiar with their church history?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's an old saying, isn't there, that if people don't know their history, they're likely to repeat it. So,
Hmm.
and that has been whether it's secular history or it's Christian history.
Hmm.
And if we, in fact, you look at the Bible, it's full of history, and the
Hmm.
purpose for it is not just so we can be all, as you say, nerdy and historical, but it's actually so we can learn lessons from it, and hopefully we're wise enough not to repeat the same mistakes and get into a mess,
Yeah.
because God's warning us and
Yes.
saying, look, this happened before, don't do the same thing. And so, if we actually taught church history in our churches, we will be less likely to make the same mistakes because the radar would be up immediately, the
Yeah.
antennae would be up. We'd say, "Oh no, we're here. We've been here before. That was disastrous. Hey, folks, don't do this."
Hmm.
So it's actually becomes very practical
Yes.
and becomes very, very, very helpful indeed. So it's not just for your historical academics, it's actually for all of us. And I
Hmm.
remember, for example, you remember The Lion King? You ever see the
Yes,
Walt
yes,
Disney
yes,
film there? And
yes.
the lion's being deceived by his uncle Scar. Simba, I think, is the name of the young lion, and he runs off. He's been blamed for his father's death, and he's become like a hippie, hanging around with a warthog and another creature.
Didn't think
So,
our conversation was going to take that turn this morning, but it's great. Go
but
on.
what happened was that there's that baboon who hits him on the head because he says,
Hmm.
it's all in the past, it doesn't matter. So he hits him on the head. He says, "Ow," you know, and he says, "It's all in the past, it doesn't matter." Oh, but it hurts. Yes. So that's the point, that
Yes,
it applies
yes,
to all of us, that we've
yes,
got to learn from biblical history and our own church history in Scotland and
yeah,
elsewhere so that we don't just make the same mistakes, but also there's a healing process that we
sure, absolutely.
understand. Yeah.
Yeah. Because a great verse, isn't it? Is in Corinthians, these things happened to them in the past and are written down as an example for you.
Yes, that's right.
Exactly the point you're making. So we often fail to learn those lessons. Um, yeah, so, I mean, in your broad knowledge and discovery of Scottish church history, this may be an unfair question. It's a bit like asking a parent, which is your favorite child? Do you have a favorite character or event or both from Scottish church history that particularly resonates with you?
Can I be greedy and choose a few of them?
Feel free.
I like John Knox because he's such a rugged character that refused to give up. When others
Yes.
compromised under pressure, he remained steadfast. He refused. For him, Scripture alone was his authority from Christ, and he must be faithful to the Lord,
Hmm.
even to death. So, uh, a lot of people these days, if they've even heard of John Knox in today's Scottish culture, but there are a lot of people they hate him. You know,
Hmm.
other people misunderstand him, and some people really get to understand him better and have really researched, realized what an extraordinary man he was. I mean, his famous prayer was, "Give me Scotland or I die," wasn't it?
Amen. Yeah, that's
So
right.
that was his thing, and he was like a prophet to the nation, a strong
Hmm.
character who refused to compromise, and it's because of his stand that we eventually saw strong leadership, seeing the Presbyterian church established, which brought in a Christian democracy, which was so key,
Hmm.
that would then impact the Puritans in London, and then even into even our British form of democracy based on a Christian democratic understanding.
Sure.
So
Yes. Yeah.
that was vital. And it was not just that; it was other issues too that came out of it. But so he's one character. Patrick Hamilton, I absolutely love.
Mm.
He was martyred for his faith at St. Andrews. He was burnt at the stake. They hated him so much, the church authorities hated him so much, they actually burnt him alive, and it took 6 hours for him to burn.
Mm.
But all the time, in the agony he was going through, he was praying for his enemies, he was blessing people, he was sharing Jesus. And what came out of something he wrote, it's called Patrick's Places, and it's the most biblical, solid presentation of the gospel I think I've ever seen. It's just
Hmm.
absolutely brilliant, and I think it should be something that Christians study. But it was his godliness. It was his. He was like Stephen in
Hmm.
Acts of the Apostles, who was stoned to death. It was the same sort of heart attitude. In fact, sometimes he's called the Stephen of Scotland.
Okay. Right.
So those two characters, Mary Slessor, wow,
Hmm.
what an amazing woman she was. A wee woman from Dundee, poor background, very white skin, very piercing blue eyes, and red hair.
Mm.
Imagine
Yes.
that she was trained in Edinburgh and she went out to Nigeria to the Calabar, and they called her the White Queen of the Calabar. And she wanted to go where no one else had been. What a gutsy woman she was.
Hmm.
And she would sit in a mud hut with the chief, all his wives and slaves behind them, human skulls in the chief's hut, the witch doctor trying to obviously put her off. But she continued, and through the breakthrough that came about, she
Hmm.
transformed that part of Nigeria by the
Yeah.
grace of God, and just an amazing, courageous woman. I
Yeah.
think probably. one of the events, oh, there's so many events, but there's one event which is really, really I treasured. And what it is was that there was Kentigern, or St. Mungo he's known as. He founded the community in Glasgow.
Hmm.
And at the same time, there was St. Columba, who was a missionary up in around Inverness area in the Highlands. And he had been based at Iona. And the two of them came together near Glasgow. They'd always wanted to meet each other. And rather than seeing themselves each other as a rival, you have an apostolic ministry there, and I have one there, and looking as if they're two dogs, sort of competing with each other. They exchanged their staffs as their symbol of authority under Christ. They
Wow.
basically said, "Your ministry is my ministry is your ministry. We don't want egos here. It's all about
Mm-hmm.
Christ's kingdom." And so that was a very, very powerful symbol that we can learn from as
Mm.
leaders, because some leaders become very, very, you know, um, protective about their egos when it concerns their ministry. And it's about Christ's kingdom, not ours. So that's a very powerful symbolic picture I think we can learn from.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And your own infectious enthusiasm comes over, Paul, which is great. I mean, that's just some church historians come over a bit dry and lecturing, as it were.
Uh,
And I think that partly puts some people off church history, quite
yes.
honestly. You need people whose passion is for that, and you certainly model that. So the title of your book is "What has Christianity Ever Done for Scotland?" So what inspired you to write that, other than just your general interest in
Mhm.
Scottish history? What inspired you to actually put that down in writing into a book?
Yeah, well, it was, I run the Christian Heritage Centre, as I mentioned beforehand. And one of our volunteers, he said, "Did you see that program on television? There was this comedian who came on with the presenter, and he was openly mocking Christianity. And he said, 'What has Christianity ever done for us?' And so they kind of had a time of ridiculing Christians publicly on television. And then they kind of got a bit more sensible, and they realized, well, education, healthcare, and this thing and that thing. So I thought, that's the seed of the idea.
Hmm.
Instead of what has Christianity ever done for us, was what has Christianity ever done for Scotland? That's where it began, from somebody who was mocking our faith
Yeah.
and turning it around for good. So, first of all, I wrote a leaflet, "What has Christianity ever done for Scotland?" And we use that effectively. And then I produced an exhibition with the same title, "What has
Okay.
Christianity ever done for Scotland?" And then we did a series of videos of the same thing. And then during the pandemic, I had lots of time. Then I started to write a book. People were actually encouraging me to write a book, so I did. And it took 4 years to write. I rewrote it because I wasn't happy with the first version. And there it is, and it's coming out, next month. So that's been an amazing journey.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. You mentioned some of your favorite characters and events. Can you give a few brief examples of how Christians have transformed Scotland over the years? What difference have they made?
Yeah, it's absolutely huge, John. In
Hmm.
fact, I think more and more people are beginning to realize this, that people are talking about Christian values. That's an issue that's been raised again and again and again in the last few
Hmm.
years. But well, first of all, British values they talk about. What are British values?
Yes,
And then they start to go back a bit further. Oh, they're Christian values.
that's right. That's right.
And in fact, these Christian values have obviously come from Christ and the Bible. It's a Christian worldview.
Yeah.
So um, rather than just individuals, it's been Christian movements in Scotland which have produced all sorts of effects. Because if we love God with everything, then we love our neighbour as ourselves. And we try to work that out with whatever calling, whatever talents we've got.
Mm.
So if you're a scientist, it's an act of worship to do good science, to love God, and to love your neighbour as yourself, to bring something that helps people.
Yeah.
And so the same thing in every area, whatever it is. So what we find is that the Christian movements, there are obviously key people who are pioneers, but they weren't just sort of isolated. it was teamwork. And so
Mm-hmm.
what we find is Christians pioneered education in
Mm-hmm.
Scotland. I mean, if you look back in the past, we had the Druids before Christianity came. And yes, they did. They handed on by word of mouth to their disciples. They taught them, but they left nothing in writing. Whatever we've got about the Druids had to be reconstructed by the pagan Roman historians and handed down to us. Everything was done by word of mouth. So, but there are things like which they regarded as science were astrology and divination, where you try
Mm-hmm.
and tell the future by investigating the guts of a human being or the way the blood pumped out or something. So I don't think any of those things would pass in science in our Edinburgh University today. So, that was the kind of thing that was going on, but it was Christians, it was the church.
Yeah.
Right from the beginning, they have a love of education, um, you know, because Jesus said to teach, to carry on, teach them everything that he
Mm-hmm.
had told us. So that was a task of the first disciples. And so, by the second century, you're seeing academies or colleges set up in the ancient world. And even in Scotland, when you read about the time of Kentigern and Glasgow, there are hundreds of people being educated, not only Bible teaching, but also there are other subjects because the Bible touches on all sorts of issues: geography, history, language, and all natural philosophy or science or things like that. So a Christian worldview is there embedded right from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And Christians are the ones who pioneered education right through from there. And it was the Presbyterian Christians, particularly, who wanted to see a school in every parish because education was limited at that point to the sort of middle upper classes, and it was very the Presbyterians. It was said we're all in this together in Christ. So a kind of equality and democracy. So they wanted to see the democracy of education, and so that went everywhere through them. And of course, all the universities we have in Scotland were founded by the church.
Mm-hmm.
Even things like teacher training colleges were founded by Christians from this city, and that spread worldwide. So that's just
Mm-hmm.
one aspect, education. Law. If you look at the law, even just a giveaway, we can see traces of it today, even if we've forgotten where it came from. If you look at the law lords of Scotland, they got crosses on their gowns.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just,
Mm-hmm.
oh, let's put a cross there, that looks nice.
Yeah. Yes.
It actually is because it came from a law in Scotland came from Christians.
Yes.
It was
Yes.
largely a Christian biblical understanding, a fairer society of justice and law, criminal law, constitutional law coming from Christians. And
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
likewise, other issues, medicine, uh,
Yeah.
the key people in medicine, Lord Joseph Lister was an Episcopalian Christian, and he pioneered antiseptics and advanced modern surgery. He was friends with Florence Nightingale, a Christian from London, and he said, "We got lousy nurses in Edinburgh. Could you send up some good Christian ones and set up a teacher college to train up nurses professionally?" And so professional nursing came about through a Christian movement.
Yes.
Things like uh, you know, um, the saline drip, the bag you have in the hospital with the
Mm-hmm.
tube going in your body, that was invented by a Christian, Thomas Latter, from Leith, actually a doctor in Leith in Edinburgh. Things like the hypodermic syringe, invented by another Christian, Presbyterian Alexander Wood from Edinburgh. And then you have obviously things like penicillin with antibiotics, and that was Alexander Fleming. And
Mm-hmm.
he was a Presbyterian Christian from Edinburgh, and then he moved down to England, became an Anglican. But a lot
Right.
of people think penicillin came as just a random thing, it just came by
Yeah.
chance.
Mm-hmm.
But what people miss out was he was a Christian, he was praying for God's guidance. And he saw it as a miracle from God that was
Mm-hmm.
revealed to him. So,
Yeah.
you see these things, obstetric ultrasound. That was another Christian that pioneered that.
Mm-hmm.
The first successful kidney transplant, another Christian. The sanitary conditions where we have under street Victorian piping rather than throw
Mm-hmm.
all our effluent on the street. That was another Christian, Sir Henry Littlejohn from Edinburgh. So these are just some of them. There are
Mm-hmm.
so many more in science. James Clerk Maxwell, an absolute giant He was Albert Einstein's hero in science, and
Okay.
you know, Einstein used to have a poster of him, a picture of him above his desk, because
Right.
people said,
Right.
"Well, Einstein, you're a brilliant scientist, but do you stand on the shoulders of Isaac Newton, who was also a Christian?" He said, "No,
Hmm.
I stand on
Hmm.
the shoulders of Maxwell." And Maxwell's equations was the foundation for our technological revolution. Without him, we'd have had no X-rays, no computers, no radio, no television, all those kind of things that came about through his pioneering work, and including color photography. What an
Right.
extraordinary man he was. And so what you're seeing is Christians involved. They were pioneering in Scotland abolition of slavery before William Wilberforce. Treatment of animals properly. We treated animals horribly before. And the whole RSPCA movement, Royal Protection of Cruelty to Animals,
Mm.
came about through a chap called Lord Erskine, who was a Christian from Edinburgh who was in the House of Lords in London. And he had a Bible verse in his head: the righteous man cares for the needs of his animals. And so he pressed for laws to be passed to treat animals properly. Women's votes. There are so many more things, I could mention
Mm.
about. Don't have time to say, but it was a massive thing. Democracy, human rights, all of these kind of things,
Yes.
hospitals, and so many things, which was a worldview that broke out of Scotland, transformed our nation, and the missionaries took that worldview to the nations and reproduced it.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's remarkable. And as you say, you could go on and on with more and more examples. And it often strikes me, for a relatively small nation,
Yeah,
the world, proportionally, I'm sure disproportionately, Scotland has influenced not just Scotland, but the Christians in Scotland have influenced not just Scotland, but the world, I
yeah,
think disproportionately to the size of the nation and population.
yeah. Absolutely. In fact, I had one time in the Christian Heritage Centre a few years ago, four Chinese men came in, and I got chatting to them. They all spoke English well, and two of them were politicians, so in the communist government, and two had PhDs in social history. And the two men who had their PhDs had studied Scotland. And what they wanted to find out was, why was it that Scotland, as such a small nation, had such a massive impact on the world?
Hmm.
And so they studied it. I mean, the population of Scotland today, you could drop into a little bucket somewhere in China because China is so huge.
Yes.
So they discovered, both of them separately, that what had transformed Scotland and the world from Scotland was Christian movements from the past. They weren't Christians. This is
Hmm.
only their research, doing both of them getting PhDs on the subject. And so I had a brilliant conversation. None of them were Christians. And so from that Christian worldview, I could then share about Jesus, and it was
Yeah.
wonderful.
Yeah. Brilliant.
But what they said, which was really upsetting towards the end, before they left, was this: what we don't understand about Scotland is we look at these things, extraordinary things which came from Scotland, uh, from Christian movements, and but what you've done in Scotland is you've thrown them all on the rubbish dump.
Mm. Hmm.
You've
Yes.
taken the things produced by those Christians, you've kept those, but you've thrown away what caused it, the Christian
Yes.
faith, the root of it.
Yes.
And one of them said it's like we're going on the rubbish dump and collecting all these treasures.
That's sobering, isn't it? Yeah. But Paul, it brings the last question I'm going to ask, which is you have this ministry, Christian Heritage Edinburgh.
Yeah,
And I'll put links to this on the video so folk find out about that and the centre in St Columba's. But your motto is challenging today from the past,
yeah.
which goes back to where we sort of began the conversation about learning the lessons from the past and not repeating the mistakes. So, how do you see the present state of Scotland as a nation, and what can we learn from our history that will challenge us today?
Absolutely. That's brilliant because, yeah, Scotland and the UK generally is an absolute mess, I think.
Mm.
It's like what's happened is the Christians sacrifice as well. They produced all sorts of things, and then they were handed over to the state, education, healthcare, and many other things. And so over time, we began to, in the last sort of 50 or so years, we began to increasingly want to remove Christianity from the picture and just keep the benefits of it. And so that can tick along for a while, but eventually what happens is that if you don't, and this is something that Margaret Thatcher, I wish I had the quote with me here, but Margaret Thatcher, she addressed the Church of Scotland Assembly on the Royal Mile in 1988, and she said when she was a student, before she became Prime Minister, they wrestled and discussed to the early hours of the morning. We want the benefits of Christianity without Christianity. And they came to the conclusion you can't do that because
Yeah.
what happens is that the fruit will last so long and eventually it won't produce any more fruit.
Hmm.
It will shrivel up and die. You have to nurture the roots if you want to get the fruit to come back. And so you actually have to nurture the Christian faith itself to produce those benefits. And so that was a very wise thing she said when she addressed the Church of Scotland Assembly. And I just wish that the nation would listen to such wisdom, whatever your views of Margaret Thatcher are. That was a amazing insight, and it's
Hmm.
absolutely spot on. And what we've done
Yeah.
in Scotland, Scotland was once known as the land of the book, the land of the Bible, and there's been such a despising of the Bible. I mean,
Hmm.
I just think about what happened in Glasgow some years ago, where people were invited in the name of art to come and write whatever they wanted and deface a Bible. Could you
Hmm.
imagine if they'd done that with the Quran?
Yes, exactly.
It would
Yes.
have been horrendous,
Yes. Yes.
but Christians were obviously heartbroken and sad, but nobody
Yes.
went in and blew anybody up or anything over it.
Hmm.
And they were defacing, writing horrible things in the Bible in the name of art.
Hmm.
There was somebody who was going to go outside St. Giles. He'd made a statue out of matches of Satan and Jesus Christ, and he was going to set fire to them outside, both of them outside St. Giles. And some people complained about it. I think he did it somewhere else in the end, but that gives you some idea of the
Hmm.
level of hatred of Christ and the Bible there is in
Yes.
Scotland
Yes.
amongst certain people. And so what's happening though is the further we go in our rebellion, uh, we're getting into a mess and we're suddenly in this chaos. Just watch the news and
Hmm.
it's so disheartening.
Yeah.
Government's a mess. The NHS system is a mess. The education system is a mess.
Yes.
Corruption levels in government, corruption in the education and the healthcare, corruption with things are being exposed in the BBC, and all sorts of things going on that have been ticking away for years and years
Hmm.
because we've turned our back on Christ
Yes.
and his values, and we're just riding on the back of the benefits. But the benefits themselves are now in a process of erosion. We're actually losing them. So,
Hmm.
for example, Christians banned abortion.
Hmm.
But that's all come back, and even pressing for abortion up to birth for any reason,
Yes.
even
Yeah.
sex selective abortion,
Yes. Yes.
even whispers of infanticide could be acceptable. So these things where Christians remove them from our culture because of the love we're made in the image of God and to love people. And it was a culture of life rather than the culture of death. So these things we're seeing happening in our nation. But what's happening too is that as we're heading towards a cliff of self-destruction, more and more people are beginning to wake up and realize, hey, we're in a crisis in Britain.
Yes.
If we don't do something really radical soon, we'll lose our nation and will increasingly become a laughing stock of the world. So the experiment we've had in the last 50 years hasn't worked. And so more and more voices are rising up and speaking out. It's interesting. Uh, Instead of largely coming through the church where you'd expect it to come, it's coming from outside the church.
Hmm.
People like Douglas Murray, who's an agnostic,
Yes.
and Jordan Peterson. I think he's come to believe in God, but I don't think he's a Christian yet.
Hmm.
And there's a whole bunch of these other people, who are writing out against the sexual revolution, failed, or various things. And, that there's a movement they're beginning to quote Christians.
Yes. Yes.
They're
Yes.
beginning to trace back their steps to see where we went wrong. And it was
Hmm.
since we turned our back on Christ and the biblical worldview, that's where we went wrong.
Hmm.
And it's coming from people largely who are not Christians, but some
Yes.
actually are becoming Christians, and they're becoming a voice in our culture
Hmm.
that's waking people up. And so we're certainly heading for a very critical time in
Hmm.
Scotland and Britain, UK. And it's a very, yeah, it's a very, very challenging time indeed, but we need to bring back Christ and the biblical worldview.
Yes. And your point is really important and interesting. Much of this waking up moment is coming from outside the church, speaking where they're filling the place where the church should be speaking. And the
Yes.
part of the problem, of course, is that this whole trend that's going on in the world has actually, in fact, so much of the church has departed from its spiritual heritage and roots. That's almost the most tragic thing of all.
Yeah, well, the thing we found is that, people, on the one hand, yes, the Christians should have been standing up more. They should have been more salt and light. We withdrew. I
Mm.
think probably because we got weary and worn out of such a long war of attrition against us,
Yes.
and being pushed into a corner more and more.
Hmm.
Whereas people, if it's a new thing, they suddenly wake up to this Christian thing. It's what? Why aren't the church? Isn't the
Yes.
church doing something more?
Yes. Yeah.
If for them it's all fresh and new and radical,
Sure.
and so I think that's probably what we're getting. And probably, I remember watching a series very well produced by a Muslim chap about the life of Christ, and he'd done it accurately. That was amazing. I couldn't
Hmm.
believe it. And because he was a Muslim, that was acceptable. He was
Okay.
obviously accurate about Christ. And there was
Yes.
another
Yes.
one produced by an agnostic. And again, because he was agnostic, that
Yes.
must be true.
That
But if
must
a
be true.
Christian produced it, it was
Yes.
obviously wrong. Even if he said the
Strange, isn't
same
it?
thing.
Yeah, ridiculous. That's
So
right.
that,
Yeah.
that that's what we've been used to for the last
Yes.
50 years. So there's a new, and I think it's like God knows. And so he's using
Yes.
people
Yes.
outside the church who are going to be listened to far more than we would be.
Hmm. Yeah.
And I think what will happen is it'll challenge the church as well. And it
Yes.
will encourage us to wake up and be
Yes.
courageous as well.
Amen. Amen. Yeah. So that's great. So, Paul, your book, What has Christianity Ever Done for Scotland, coming out in January,
Yes,
published by
January
Christian
the
Focus.
20th is the actual date. The publishers have given 20th of January next year. Uh,
Brilliant.
yeah.
That's great. Okay. And my hope and prayer is that if I can put it the strangest way, I mean, you're so infectious and enthusiastic about Scottish church history. I'm hoping that some of that virus will stick to your book, and as people read the book, we'll all get infected with a bit more enthusiasm, and
Oh, yes.
ultimately drive us to our knees for Scotland.
Yes.
That's what
Yes.
we need, isn't it?
Yes, and to also be engaging with people because
Yes.
we do this
Mhm.
all the time when we do street cafe in different locations in Edinburgh. So we serve hot drinks, we engage with people. So we're out in the meadows near the university on Wednesday.
Okay.
The amount of students we ask them, we're making a hot drink for them. We say to them, "Oh, what are you studying? Physics, history, sociology, whatever it happens to be." So I train the team working with me, ask and show an interest in them, and be praying in your heart, how can I build a conversation spiritually to Christ, the
Mm.
gospel, from what they're interested in?
Yes.
So, I had a great conversation with somebody who was doing physics. And straight away, that was my link, of course, to people like James Clerk Maxwell, Thomas Young, David Brewster, all Christians and who pioneered great things in science. And she knew all these famous people and didn't know they were Christians. And of course, that led to then the gospel.
Yeah.
And a sociologist, Marxist, he didn't know. He thought Marxism, communism, equality, and all these ideas had come from Karl Marx. So I had to take him back a bit earlier than Karl Marx. And I read him a section from Acts of the Apostles, how
Okay.
the disciples were, selling houses, land, and so
Yes.
on to provide so that they'll be all raised up together in Christ.
Yes.
But the difference is rather than trying to put laws and force people to be equal,
Hmm.
it was a heart change.
Yes.
They
Yeah.
wanted to be like that
Mm.
because they love Christ, and that's the difference. And he
Right.
said, "Wow, I never knew this is in the Bible." He said, "I really want to read a Bible. Give me a Bible."
Fantastic. That's great.
So,
Brilliant.
it's engaging with our
That's
culture
right.
because if we know our Christian worldview in
Hmm.
Scotland, particularly how that affected our culture, then
Yeah.
we can engage in every area of society and we
Yes.
can become a voice in the public square rather than being driven back into a ghetto somewhere.
Yeah. Brilliant. That's great. Paul, that's great. I'm trusting and praying this book will do really well, and this little video will help promote it and make it known, that would be all to the good as well. But thanks for taking the time to talk about it this morning.
Thank you so much, John. Really, really appreciate that.
Okay, Lord bless you, my brother. God bless you.
God bless. Bye bye.
Bye.